"By your leave, sire," said Drinian, "we will try to get under the lee of that country by rowing and lie in harbour, maybe, till this is over." Caspian agreed, but a long row against the gale did not bring them to the land before evening. By the last light of that day they steered into the natural harbour and anchored, but no one went ashore that night. In the morning they found themselves in the green bay of a rugged, lonely-looking country which sloped up to a rocky summit. From the windy north beyond that summit cloud came streaming rapidly. They lowered the boat and loaded her with any of the water casks which were now empty. "Which stream shall we water at, Drinian?" said Caspian, as he took a seat in the stern sheets of the boat. "There seems to be two coming down into the bay." "It makes little odds, sire," said Drinian, "but I think it is a shorter pull to that one on the starboard, the eastern one." "Here comes the rain," said Lucy. "I should think it does," said Edmund, for it was already pelting hard. "I say, let's go to the other stream. There are some trees there, and we'll have some shelter." "Yes, let's," said Eustace. "No point in getting wetter than we need." But all the time Drinian was steadily steering to the starboard, like tiresome people in cars who continue at 40 miles an hour while you are explaining to them that they are on the wrong road. "They're right, Drinian," said Caspian. "Why don't you bring her head round and make for the western stream?" "As your majesty pleases," said Drinian a little shortly. He had an anxious day with the water yesterday, and he didn't like advice from landsmen. But he altered his course, and it turned out afterwards that it was a good thing he did. By the time they had finished watering, the rain was over, and Caspian, with Eustace, the Pemphises, and Reepicheep, decided to walk up to the top of the hill and see what could be seen. It was a stiffish climb through coarse grass and heather, and they saw neither man nor beast except seagulls. When they reached the top they saw that it was a very small island, not more than 20 acres, and from this height the sea looked larger and more desolate than it did from the deck, or even the fighting tops of the Dwn Trdr. "Crazy, you know," said Eustace to Lucy in a low voice, looking to the eastern horizon. "Sailing in on and on into that, with no idea what we might get into." But he only said it out of habit, not really nastily as he would have done at one time. It was too cold to stay long on the ridge, for the wind still blew freshly from the north. "Don't let us go back the same way," said Lucy as they turned. "Let's go along a bit and come down by the other stream, the one Drinian wanted to go to." Everyone agreed to this, and after about 15 minutes they were at the source of the second river. It was a more interesting place than they expected, a deep little mountain lake surrounded by cliffs except for a narrow channel on the seaward side out of which the water flowed. Here at last they were out of the wind, and all sat down in the heather above the cliff for a rest. All sat down but one. It was Edmund. Jumped up again, and very quickly. They go in for sharp stones on this island," he said, groping about in the heather. "Where is the wretched thing? Ah, now I've got it. Hullo! It wasn't a stone at all. No, it's a sword hilt. No, by Jove, it's a whole sword. What the rust is left of it. It must have lain here for ages." "Narnian too, by the look of it," said Caspian, as they all crowded around. "I'm sitting on something too," said Lucy. "Something hard." It turned out to be the remains of mail shirt. By this time everyone was on their hands and knees, feeling in the thick heather in every direction. Their search revealed one by one a helmet, a dagger, a few coins, not Calormen crescents, but genuine Narnian lions and trees, such as you might see any day in the marketplace of Beaver's Dam or Baruna. "Looks as if this might all be what's left of our 7 lords," said Edmund. "Just what I was thinking," said Caspian. "I wonder which it was. There's nothing on this dagger to show, and I wonder how he died." "And I wonder how we are to avenge him," added Reepicheep. Edmund, the only one of the party who had read several detective stories, had meanwhile been thinking. "Look here," he said. "There's something very fishy about this. He can't have been killed in a fight." "Why not?" asked Caspian. "No bones," said Edmund. "And an enemy might take the armor and leave the body, but who ever heard of a chap who'd won a fight carrying away the body and leaving the armor?" "Perhaps he was killed by a wild animal," Lucy suggested. It'd be a clever animal, said Edmund. That would take off a man's mail shirt off. Perhaps a dragon, said Caspian. Nothing doing, said Eustace. A dragon couldn't do it. I ought to know. Well, let's get away from this place anyways, said Lucy. She had not felt like sitting down again since Edmund had raised the question of bones. If you like, said Caspian, getting up. I don't think any of this stuff is worth taking, anyways. They came down and around to the little opening where the stream came out of the lake, and stood looking at the deep water within the circle of cliffs. If it had been a hot day, no doubt some would have been tempted to bathe, and everyone would have had a drink. Indeed, even as it was, Eustace was on the very point of stooping down to scoop up some water in his hands, when Reepicheep and Lucy both at the same moment cried, "Look!" So he forgot about his drink, and looked. The bottom of the pool was made of a large grayish-blue stones, and the water was perfectly clear. And on the bottom lay a life-size figure of a man, made apparently of gold. It lay face downwards, with its arms stretched out above its head. And so it happened as they looked at it, the clouds parted, and the sun shone out. The golden shape was lit up from the end to end. Lucy thought it was the most beautiful statue she had ever seen. "Well," whistled Caspian, "that was worth coming to see. I wonder if we can get it out." "We can dive for it, sire," said Reepicheep. "No good at all," said Edmund. "At least, if it's really gold, solid gold, it'd be far too heavy to bring up. And that pool's 12 or 15 feet deep, if it's an inch. Half a moment, though. It's a good thing I brought a hunting spear with me. Let's see what the depth is like. Hold on to my hand, Caspian, while I lean out over the water a bit." Caspian took his hand, and Edmund, leaning forward, began to lower his spear into the water. Before it was halfway in, Lucy said, "I don't believe the statue is gold at all. I think it's only the light. Your spear looks just the same color." "What's wrong?" said several voices at once, for Edmund had suddenly let go of the spear. "I couldn't hold it," gasped Edmund. "It seems so heavy." "And there it is on the bottom now," said Caspian. "And Lucy is right. It looks just the same color as the statue." But Edmund, who appeared to have been having some trouble with his boots, at least he was bending down and looking at one of them, straightened himself all at once and shouted out in a sharp voice which people hardly ever disobey, "Get back! Back from the water! All of you, at once!" They all did, and stared at him. "Look," said Edmund, "look at the toes of my boots." "They look a bit yellow," began Eustace. "They're gold, solid gold," interrupted Edmund. "Look at them, feel them. The leather's pulled away from it already, and they're as heavy as lead." "By Aslan," said Caspian, "you don't mean to say—" "Yes, I do," said Edmund. "That water turns things into gold. It turned the spear into gold. That's why it got so heavy. And it was just lapping against my feet. It's a good thing I wasn't barefoot. And it turned the toe caps into gold. And that poor fellow on the bottom, well, you see." "So it isn't a statue at all," said Lucy in a low voice. "No, the whole thing is plain now. He was here on a hot day. He undressed at the top of the cliff, where we are sitting. The clothes have rotted away or been taken by birds to line nests with. The armor's still there. Then he dived and—" "Don't," Lucy said. "What a horrible thing." "We've had a narrow shave. What a narrow shave we've had," said Edmund. "Narrow indeed," said Reepicheep. "Anyone's finger, anyone's foot, anyone's whisker, or anyone's tail might have slipped into the water at any moment." "All the same," said Caspian, "we may as well test it." He stooped down and wrenched up a spray of heather. Then, very cautiously, he knelt beside the pool and dipped it in. It was heather that he dipped. What he drew out was a perfect model of heather made of the purest gold, heavy and soft as lead. "The king who owned this island," said Caspian slowly, and his face flushed as he spoke, "would soon be the richest of all the kings of the world. I claim this land forever as Narnian possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island, and I bind you all to secrecy. No one must ever know of this, not even Drinian, on pain of death. Do you hear?" "Who are you talking to?" said Edmund. "I'm no subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way round. I am one of the 4 ancient sovereigns of Narnia. and you are under allegiance to the High King my brother." "So it has come to that, King Edmund, has it?" said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. "Oh, stop it, both of you," said Lucy. "That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Oh!" Her voice died away in a gasp, and everyone else saw what she'd seen. Across the grey hillside above them, grey for the heather was not yet in bloom, without noise, without looking at them, and shining as if he were in a bright sunlight though the sun had in fact gone in, passed with the slowest pace the hugest lion that human eyes had ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterwards, "He was the size of an elephant," though at another time she only said, "the size of a cart horse." But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan. And nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from sleep.